When a child is born bearing the ancient marks of ancestors on his skin, the spirits speak truths that no living soul can silence, and some secrets are too powerful to stay buried. The glass towers of Lagos reflected the amber sunset as Aduni. Bakare gripped the leather seat of her husband's Mercedes, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Marcus Bakare, CEO of Bakare Industries, pressed the accelerator harder through the evening traffic, his Rolex catching the dashboard light as he gripped the steering wheel. His tailored Armani suit was wrinkled now, sweat beading on his dark forehead despite the air conditioning. "The hospital, Marcus! Drive faster!" Aduni cried, her designer maternity dress clinging to her as another contraction seized her. Her perfectly styled braids, adorned with gold threads, had begun to loosen from their elegant updo. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist caught the light as she reached for her husband's arm. Marcus had built an empire from nothing, rising from the dusty villages of Ogun State to become one of Nigeria's most powerful businessmen. But tonight, as his wife labored to bring their first child into the world, an ancient dread clawed at his chest. A fear that had haunted him since the day he'd turned his back on his village and the promises he'd made there. At the private hospital, Dr. Adalek, a woman in her 50s with natural gray locks and expensive frames, prepared the delivery room. The Bakares were her most prominent patients, and everything had to be perfect. As Aduni was wheeled into the pristine white room, Marcus paced the marble corridors, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. His phone buzzed constantly with business calls, but for once, the billionaire ignored them all. Something felt different about this night, heavy, as if the very air carried whispers from the past he'd tried so hard to forget. The cry that pierced the delivery room at 11:47 p.m. was unlike any Dr. Adalek had heard in her 30 years of practice. It wasn't just the powerful wail of a healthy newborn, it carried something deeper, older, as if the child announced not just his arrival into the world, but the arrival of truth itself. Aduni, exhausted but radiant in her hospital gown, her makeup smudged but her joy unmistakable, reached for her son with trembling, manicured hands. "Let me see him," she whispered, her voice hoarse from labor. But as Dr. Adalek lifted the baby, her expression changed. The smile faded from her face, replaced by something between wonder and concern. The baby was beautiful, perfectly formed with his father's strong features and his mother's elegant bone structure, but across his tiny chest, dark as ink against his caramel skin, was a mark unlike anything the doctor had ever seen. It wasn't a birthmark in any medical sense. It was intricate, deliberate, resembling the ancient symbols she'd seen in museums dedicated to Yoruba heritage. The pattern formed what looked like a tree with twisted roots, and within those roots, smaller symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the hospital's fluorescent lights. Marcus entered the room, adjusting his silk tie, his confidence radiating from every thread of his custom-tailored suit. But when his eyes fell upon his son, the blood drained from his face. His expensive watch seemed to tick louder in the sudden silence. He recognized the mark. How could he not? It was the same symbol carved into the sacred Iroko tree in his home village, the tree where he'd made promises to his grandfather before abandoning everything for the glittering life of Lagos. "Sir?" Dr. Adalek's voice seemed to come from far. "Way. The baby is healthy, but this mark... Have you seen anything like this in your family history?" Word of the marked child spread through Lagos's elite circles faster than Marcus could contain it. By morning, their penthouse apartment overlooking Victoria Island was buzzing with visitors, but not the kind Marcus had expected. Alongside the congratulatory flower arrangements from business partners and the expensive baby gifts from society friends came something else. Elderly people Marcus didn't recognize, dressed in traditional white agbada and gel, their eyes holding knowledge that made his blood run cold. Aduni, resplendent in a flowing white caftan with gold embroidery, her hair wrapped in an elaborate head wrap that cost more than most people's monthly salary, held baby Kemi close to her chest. Her diamond earrings caught the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but her expression was troubled. "Marcus, who are these people? They keep asking to see the baby, speaking in Yoruba about marks and messages from ancestors." She adjusted the silk baby blanket, imported from Italy, but her hands shook slightly. Marcus loosened his platinum cufflinks, his usual composure cracking. He'd spent 20 years building walls between himself and his past, surrounding himself with glass, steel, and success. His Bugatti in the garage, his collection of diamond-encrusted watches, his penthouse that overlooked the Lagos Lagoon, all of it was supposed to prove how far he'd come. But as these elders gathered in his modern living room, their presence seeming to dim the LED lights and make the smart home technology feel foolish, Marcus realized that some things couldn't be bought, couldn't be built over, couldn't be forgotten. Chief Adebayo arrived at sunset, and even Marcus's security team seemed to step aside without being asked. The old man moved with dignity despite his age, his walking stick carved from ancient wood, his white agbada flowing like water. His wife, Mama Folek, followed, her gale tied in the traditional style, her jewelry simple but clearly ancestral, pieces that held stories rather than price tags. Behind them came others, elders from villages Marcus had tried to forget. Their presence, filling the modern apartment with something his money couldn't purchase: authenticity. "Omo Marcus." Chief Adebayo's voice was like aged palm wine, smooth but powerful. He used Marcus's childhood name deliberately, stripping away the businessman's armor. "We have come because the spirits sent word. Your son carries the mark of Eliaif, the mark of promises broken and debts unpaid." Aduni, now wearing a flowing emerald dress that complemented her gold jewelry, looked between her husband and the chief with growing alarm. The baby lay in a designer bassinet worth more than a year's salary for most Nigerians, but all eyes were on the mark across his tiny chest. Marcus straightened his Italian suit jacket, but his authority felt hollow here. "Chief, with respect, we live in modern times. My son was born in the best hospital in Lagos, attended by the finest doctors. This is simply a birthmark." The old man's laugh cut through Marcus's words like a blade through silk. "You think your glass towers can hide you from the ancestors? You think your German cars can drive you away from promises made under the sacred Iroko tree?" The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning, but even that seemed to fade as the weight of old words settled over them all. That night, as Lagos glittered below them through the panoramic windows, Marcus stood alone on his balcony, still dressed in his business suit, but with his tie loosened, his confidence unraveling. The city lights that usually filled him with pride now felt like accusations, each gleaming tower a reminder of what he'd built on the foundation of broken promises. Aduni approached, having changed into a silk nightgown that probably cost more than a village family's annual income. Her hair now loose and flowing, her makeup carefully reapplied but unable to hide her concern. "Tell me what they mean, Marcus. What promises? What tree?" Her voice was gentle but insistent, her manicured fingers touching his arm. The weight of her wedding ring, a 5-carat diamond that had made headlines in society magazines, felt heavier tonight. Marcus had given her everything money could buy: designer clothes, jewelry that graced magazine covers, cars that turned heads, homes that made architectural statements. But he'd never given her the truth. Marcus closed his eyes, and for a moment, he wasn't the billionaire CEO anymore. He was 18 again, standing before his grandfather under the ancient Iroko tree in Ile-Ife, wearing simple clothes, his feet bare in the red earth. "My grandfather was dying," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "He called me to the sacred tree, the one our family had tended for generations. He made me promise, swear on the ancestors, that I would return to lead our people, that I would use any success the spirits granted me to lift up our village." The words fell like stones into water, creating ripples that would change everything. The next morning brought more visitors, not just elders now, but reporters, social media influencers, and curiosity seekers drawn by rumors of the miracle baby born to Lagos's power couple. Marcus's PR team worked frantically to control the narrative. But how do you spin the supernatural? How do you manage the ancestors? Aduni, dressed in a stunning turquoise ensemble with matching head wrap and gold accents, held court in their living room. But her smile felt strained as camera flashes illuminated the mark on their son's chest. "The mark is growing," Dr. Adeleka informed them privately, her professional demeanor barely concealing her amazement. She'd traded her usual white coat for an elegant blue dress, respecting the traditional elements that seemed to permeate even medical discussions now. "It's not just visible, it's raised, three-dimensional, like a living tattoo. In 30 years of medicine, I've never seen anything like it." The baby, Kemi, seemed unusually alert, his eyes tracking movements with an intelligence that unnerved even the nurses. His tiny fingers would trace the mark on his chest, as if he understood its significance. Marcus excused himself from the crowd and retreated to his study, surrounded by awards, photographs with presidents and celebrities, certificates of achievement, that papered over his guilt. His laptop displayed his company's stock price, still soaring, but the numbers felt meaningless now. On his mahogany desk sat a single item that didn't belong with the modern luxury, a small carved wooden box his grandfather had given him, unopened for 20 years. With trembling hands, he lifted the lid. Inside was a piece of bark from the sacred Iroko tree, a photograph of his grandfather, and a letter written in careful Yoruba script. "When the ancestors call, money cannot answer. When promises are broken, the spirits will make them visible for all to see." The confrontation came at midnight, when the Lagos elite had finally departed and only family remained. Aduni sat in their bedroom, still elegant in her silk pajamas, but her composure was cracking. Baby Kemi lay between them, the mark on his chest seeming to pulse with its own rhythm in the dim light of their crystal chandelier. "I deserve the truth, Marcus. All of it." Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet, the tone of a woman who'd supported her husband's rise but wouldn't be a fool. Marcus removed his Rolex, his platinum wedding band, his diamond cufflinks, all the armor of success, and finally spoke the words that had poisoned him for 2 decades. "I made a sacred promise to my grandfather and the ancestors. I swore that when I became successful, I would return to help our village. I would build schools, hospitals, bring clean water, create opportunities. I swore on the sacred tree, called on the ancestors to witness." His voice broke as 20 years of guilt poured out like water from a broken dam. "But I never went back. The money, the power, the life we built here, it became more important than keeping my word. I told myself the village was backward, that I'd transcended my origins. I sent money occasionally but never returned, never honored the covenant." Aduni's hand flew to her mouth, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. She thought of all their charity galas, all the causes they'd supported to build their public image, while her husband's own people, his own promises, went ignored. "And now," Marcus continued, looking at his son, "the ancestors have marked our child. The spirits have made visible what I tried to hide. Every person who sees Kemi will know that his father is an oathbreaker." Chief Adebayo returned 3 days later, this time with a delegation that filled Marcus's penthouse lobby despite his security's protests. They came dressed in full traditional regalia, flowing agbada, intricate jewel, coral beads, and silver, ornaments that spoke of heritage rather than wealth. Their presence transformed the modern space into something ancient and powerful, making the designer furniture and contemporary art seem shallow by comparison. "The ancestors have spoken through your child," the chief announced, his voice carrying the authority of generations. "The mark grows stronger each day, and so does the spiritual debt. Your son will bear this burden until the promises are fulfilled, not with money alone, but with presence, with honor, with the return of the prodigal son. Aduni, dressed in a flowing white dress with gold embroidery, held Kemi close, but even she could see that the mark had indeed grown more pronounced, more intricate, as if mapping out the geography of broken promises. Marcus, despite wearing his most expensive suit, felt naked before these elders. "What must I do?" he asked, the question of a desperate father rather than a confident CEO. The chief smiled, but it was not unkind. "You must return to the village. You must stand before the sacred Iroko tree. You must ask forgiveness of the ancestors and commit, not just in words, but in deeds, to fulfilling your oath. Only then will your son be free of this mark." The room fell silent except for the baby's soft breathing, but in that silence lay the weight of destinies about to be fulfilled. The convoy of black SUVs that left Lagos looked like a presidential motorcade, but Marcus felt like a man driving toward his judgment. Aduni sat beside him, having chosen traditional attire for their journey, a stunning purple aso-oke with matching jewel, her jewelry consisting of coral beads and gold pieces that honored both her beauty and the gravity of their mission. Baby Kemi lay in her arms, and somehow the mark on his chest seemed less pronounced now, as if anticipating its homecoming. The roads changed from smooth Lagos highways to rougher rural paths, from glass towers to mud houses, from the smell of money to the scent of red earth and growing things. Marcus watched his empire recede in the rearview mirror, replaced by the landscape of his childhood, a world he'd convinced himself he'd outgrown, but that now welcomed him like a mother's embrace. His Armani suit felt ridiculous here. His Rolex seemed to tick accusations with each second. As they entered the village of Il-If, crowds gathered despite the early hour. These weren't the society photographers of Lagos, but the real people. Marcus had abandoned, farmers in work clothes, elders in traditional dress, children whose eyes held no artifice. They didn't cheer or celebrate, they simply watched as the prodigal son returned in his expensive cars to face what he'd left behind. The sacred Iroko tree stood at the village center, older than memory, its branches reaching toward heaven like gnarled fingers pleading for justice. The ceremony began at dawn, with the entire village gathered in a circle around the ancient Iroko tree. Marcus had traded his business suit for traditional white agbada, feeling more exposed than he ever had in boardrooms or television interviews. Aduni, radiant in white lace with gold threading, held Kemi as they approached the tree together. The baby was calm, his eyes fixed on the carved symbols in the ancient bark, symbols that matched exactly the mark on his chest. Chief Adebayo spoke words in ancient Yoruba that seemed to make the very air vibrate with power. Other elders poured libations, their movements ritual and precise, calling on ancestors whose names echoed like drums in the morning air. Marcus knelt in the red earth, his expensive shoes forgotten, his hands touching the roots of the tree where his grandfather had made him swear his oath 20 years ago. "Forgive me," he whispered, first in English, then in Yoruba. "Forgive the broken promises, the forgotten debts, the abandoned covenant." As the sun rose higher, something miraculous began to happen. The mark on baby Kemi's chest started to fade, not disappearing entirely, but transforming. The harsh, accusatory lines softened into something beautiful, a symbol not of shame, but of redemption, not of broken promises, but of renewed covenant. Aduni gasped as she watched her son's skin change, the spiritual burden lifting like morning mist before the sun. But Marcus knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of honoring promises long delayed. Standing before the sacred tree, Marcus made new promises. Not the desperate words of youth seeking fortune, but the careful commitments of a man who had learned the cost of broken oaths. "I pledge half of my wealth to this village and others like it. I pledge to build schools, hospitals, clean water systems, and sustainable businesses. I pledge to spend half my year here, not as the Lagos billionaire visiting the backward village, but as a son returning to serve his people. Aduni stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. I make this pledge with my husband. Our son will know his heritage, will understand that true wealth comes not from what we accumulate, but from what we give, not from how high we rise, but how many we lift with us. Her words surprised even Marcus, his society wife embracing a life that would mean sharing the spotlight, sharing their resources, sharing their very identity with people she'd never known existed. The elders nodded their approval, and Chief Adebayo raised his staff. The ancestors accept this new covenant. Your son's mark will remain but transformed, not as shame, but as a reminder that the spiritual and material worlds are one, that success without service is emptiness, that promises made to the ancestors echo through generations. As if in response to his words, baby Kemi made a soft sound, and the mark on his chest glowed briefly in the morning sun before settling into its new form. Beautiful, meaningful, a badge of honor rather than disgrace. 6 months later, the village of Il-If bustled with construction activity. But this wasn't the impersonal machinery of corporate development. Marcus had insisted on using local workers, traditional materials where possible, and designs that honored the village's heritage while bringing it modern conveniences. The new school rose beside the ancient Iroko tree, its architecture a blend of contemporary function and traditional form. Funded by Bakare Industries but belonging to the community, Aduni had transformed too, trading many of her Lagos society events for meaningful work in the village. She'd established a cooperative for local women artisans, helping them sell their traditional crafts to international markets through e-commerce platforms. Her designer clothes hadn't disappeared entirely, but they now shared closet space with beautiful traditional wear. She'd learned to appreciate not just for its beauty, but for its cultural significance. Marcus split his time as promised, spending weeks in Lagos running his business empire, then weeks in the village ensuring his promises weren't empty gestures. He'd established a foundation, hired local managers, and created systems for accountability. But more than that, he'd learned to listen, to the elders who carried wisdom, to the young people who carried dreams, to the land itself that had nurtured his ancestors. The mark on baby Kemi's chest had settled into a beautiful pattern that caught admiring glances rather than worried stares, a symbol of a family that had found its way home. 1 year after the marked child's birth, the village celebrated not just Kemi's first birthday, but the fulfillment of promises that had waited 20 years. The new hospital served 3 villages. The school graduated its first class of students who would attend university on scholarships funded by the Bakare Foundation, and clean water flowed from wells that reached deep into the earth, as deep as the roots of the sacred Iroko tree. Marcus stood before the tree again, but this time he wasn't alone. Aduni beside him, radiant in a dress that cost a fraction of her old wardrobe, but suited her better than any designer gown ever had. Baby Kemi, now walking with unsteady steps, toddled between the roots of the ancient tree, his mark visible but beautiful, a symbol of redemption rather than shame. The child who had been born to expose lies had become the catalyst for living truth. The ancestors are pleased, Chief Adebayo announced to the gathered crowd. The covenant is fulfilled, the promises kept, the spiritual debt paid with interest. This child will grow knowing that he bridges 2 worlds, the modern and the traditional, the material and the spiritual, the individual and the community. As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus held his son and looked at the life they'd built together. Not just the empire of glass and steel in Lagos, but this deeper legacy of connection, service, and authentic success. The mark on Kemi's chest caught the evening light one last time, and in that moment, Marcus understood the greatest truth of all. Some promises are too sacred to break, some debts too profound to ignore, and some calls from the ancestors too powerful to resist. His son would grow up knowing that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in promises kept, communities served, and ancestral wisdom honored in every generation. If you enjoyed the story, then like, subscribe, and share this story with your loved ones. Also, tell us in the comments where you are watching from.